Nari didn't plan to run. She had a plan, a careful, methodical plan that she had rehearsed in the narrow corridor between her desk and the elevator a dozen times that week. She would file the internal report. She would collect what was owed to her. She would hand in her access card with both hands and a neutral expression, the way she had learned to do everything in that office, without flinching, without giving anything away. But plans are made for ordinary circumstances, and nothing about that night was ordinary. Because at 11:14 p.m., on the 42nd floor of a glass tower that caught the city lights like a mirror, Director Kwon locked the office door. Not with urgency. Not with rage. With the slow, deliberate precision of a man who had done this kind of thing before and found, each time, that no one had stopped him. He told her that her signature, on a document she had processed 3 months ago without reading, without questioning, the way she had been quietly trained to process everything, had authorized something she did not understand. Something that, if the right people were told, would not look like obedience. It would look like conspiracy. She ran. She made it to the street with her blazer still half-buttoned, the night air hitting her like cold water. The rain had been building for hours and it fell without apology. Her heels cracked against the wet pavement in uneven rhythm as she moved, not toward anything, just away. A black car sat at the curb with its hazard lights blinking. Patient. Steady. She pulled the door open and threw herself inside. The driver did not react. He did not ask where she was going. He did not speak at all. He simply adjusted the rearview mirror, and his eyes found hers with the particular calm of a man who owned the night, and understood, with quiet certainty, that she had just entered it. But what happened next changed everything. If you enjoy stories like this, make sure you're subscribed, because this one gets intense. 3 years is a long time to become invisible. Nario had joined Kwon Capital at 24 with a business degree, a second language, and the kind of disciplined competence that organizations absorb without acknowledging. She was not hired to think. She was hired to manage the calendar, the correspondence, the careful distance between what Director Kwon said in meetings and what he actually intended. She had become, over 3 years, the architecture of a man's professional life. Every detail managed. Every loose end quietly tied. Every question she had about the documents that crossed her desk swallowed back down with her morning coffee. She had told herself this was professionalism. She understood now, standing outside in the rain with water soaking through her blazer, that it had been something quieter and more damaging than that. It had been erasure. The gradual, voluntary erasure of every instinct that might have slowed her down. Kwon Capital occupied the top 4 floors of a building in the financial district that smelled, perpetually, of recycled air and ambition. Director Kwon himself was not a man who raised his voice. He was a man who lowered his. He had perfected the particular register that carries more threat than any shout, soft, measured, immovable. In 3 years, Nari had heard him threaten 3 different employees in tones so controlled they could have been mistaken for concern. All 3 had resigned within a month. She had filed the paperwork. She thought about that now, watching the city blur past the tinted window of a car she did not know, belonging to a man who had not yet introduced himself. His hands on the steering wheel were steady and unhurried. He was not young, but not old, somewhere in the careful middle, the kind of age that carries its history in the jaw rather than the forehead. He wore no tie. His jacket was dark and without ornamentation. She noticed, because she noticed everything, that there were no personal items in the car. No receipts. No jacket thrown across the back seat. No smell of fast food or cigarettes or human carelessness. The car was a controlled environment. Like everything else she had walked into tonight, it was a space that had been deliberately prepared. She thought about Dune. Dune was the one person Nari would have called. They had worked together 2 years ago at a smaller firm, had kept in touch through the particular loyalty of 2 people who had survived the same environment and understood each other's damage without having to narrate it. Nari had tried calling her from the elevator. 3 times. The phone rang out each time into the kind of silence that doesn't feel like an absence. It feels like an answer. In the rearview mirror, the driver's eyes had not moved from the road. And then he said, without preamble and without turning around, "He already called ahead. He knows this car." Nari's hand tightened around the door handle. Not because she was going to open it, they were moving, but because the body needs somewhere to put its fear, and her hands had always been the first to know. She asked him who he was. He told her his name was Seo-jun. He said it without inflection, the way people say names that have long since stopped feeling like introductions and started feeling like facts. He did not offer more. He did not look at her. The city continued passing the windows in long, wet smears of orange and white light. She asked how he knew about the car. He said, "Because I have been watching your director for 8 months. The sentence arrived in the car the way important sentences do, not with drama, but with weight. It changed the air. Nari looked at the back of his head and understood something that her body had been processing since she got in. This was not a coincidence. The car at the curb, the hazard lights blinking, her hand on the door, none of it had been random. She had not escaped into safety. She had escaped into a different kind of calculation. And she was already inside it. "What do you want?" she said. He did not answer immediately. He let the question sit for 2 full blocks, and Nari understood that the pause was not hesitation. It was precision. He was choosing exactly what to tell her, and exactly what to leave for later. What he told her was this: the document she signed 3 months ago was not a standard confidentiality agreement. She had processed it with the same efficiency she brought to everything, initialed the flagged line, filed the copy, moved on to the next item in the queue. But the document was a proxy authorization, and the proxy authorization had been used to move money. A significant transfer routed through a shell account that bore no name she recognized, into a structure so layered it would take a forensic team months to fully trace. And at the bottom of the chain, at the origin point, was a signature. Hers. Director Kwon had not been threatening her tonight. He had been reminding her of something he had already arranged. The Financial Crimes Unit had received a preliminary report that afternoon. She did not know this because she had been in a meeting, the kind of meeting that Kwon scheduled specifically to create her alibi for his activities. The report named a party responsible for the unauthorized transfer. It named the signatory. It named Nario. She sat very still. The rain on the windshield sounded like static. Like white noise between one life and another. "He spent 3 months building this," she said. It was not quite a question. "He spent 18 months building this," Seo-jun said. "You are the final piece." The car turned off the main road into a district that Nari had never entered. It was not dangerous in the obvious way. There were no broken lights, no graffiti, no visible signs of disorder. It was simply a part of the city that operated at a different frequency. Clean streets. Unremarkable facades. The kind of buildings that do not invite attention because they have been designed not to. She understood, with the particular clarity that fear sometimes produces, that she had crossed some invisible border. Seoul still existed on the other side of the windows. But this was a different Seoul. The car slowed. Stopped. Outside, the entrance to a building. Unmarked. A single camera above the door, angled downward. She reached for her phone. Try Dunes number 1 more time. It rang once. Twice. Seo-jun's hand appeared beside her, unhurried, not aggressive, and he took the phone from her with the same quiet authority with which he had driven the entire evening. She did not resist. She was not sure she could have. "Not yet," he said. "That line is already being listened to." He stepped out of the car. She sat for a moment in the silence he had left behind, the rain still falling, the city still indifferent, her last route to the outside world folded now into the pocket of a man she did not know. Then she opened the door and followed him inside. The interior was not what she had imagined. Nari had grown up on a particular kind of story, the kind where danger announces itself through decoration. Dark wood. Heavy curtains. The aggressive aesthetics of men who wanted the world to understand what they were. This room was nothing like that. It was clean and operational in the way that serious places are: fluorescent overheads, folding tables bearing laptops and printed documents, 3 men working in focused silence. One glanced up when they entered, assessed her in the time it takes to blink, and returned to his screen. She was not a surprise. She was, apparently, expected. The screen showed financial data, columnar figures, network diagrams, names and dates arranged in the dense grammar of an investigation. She was a trained assistant. She had spent 3 years reading documents like these on behalf of a man who relied on her not to fully understand them. Now she stood in a room full of people who understood them completely, and she felt the particular vertigo of someone who has discovered that the competence they were performing in ignorance is actually something they possess. She recognized 2 column headers from Kwon Capital's internal reports. "You've been inside his systems," she said. Seo Jun said nothing. But he didn't deny it. He led her to a smaller room off the main floor: 2 chairs, a table, a window looking onto a courtyard where the rain had formed a thin mirror on the concrete. He sat across from her and explained, with the same measured economy he had used in the car, what his organization was and was not. He did not use the word illegal. He used the word independent. He said they operated in the space between institutions that had been built to protect people and the reality that those institutions sometimes chose not to. He said this without apology and without self-congratulation. He said it the way a man describes the weather, as a condition, not a confession. What he needed from her was specific. The proxy authorization she had signed existed in 2 versions: the modified version that Kwon had filed, which bore her signature on a document that had been altered after the fact, and the original. He knew about the original because his people had traced a printer log from the 42nd floor. Nari had a habit, inherited from a cautious older colleague early in her career, of printing and keeping a personal copy of anything she signed. She had done it with this document. She had not known why, not exactly. She had filed it in a locked personal drawer and moved on. That copy, unmodified, was the cleanest evidence they had. "Why does it matter to you?" she asked. "Why Kwon specifically?" Seo Jun was quiet for a moment. When he answered, the economy of his voice did not change, but something beneath it shifted, like a tectonic thing, small and deep. He said that the people Kwon had defrauded were not corporations. They were not institutions with legal departments and recovery mechanisms. They were members of a small cooperative investment fund. Teachers. A retired civil engineer. A family that made industrial parts in a workshop outside the city. People who had pooled their savings with the understanding that the financial system was a structure designed to include them. Kwon had spent 2 years convincing them otherwise. Nari thought about the column headers she had recognized. She thought about 3 years of documents she had processed without asking what they were for. She felt something rise in her chest that was not quite guilt and not quite anger, something that lived between them, hot and without a clean name. She excused herself to use the washroom. The mirror there was small and unadorned. She stood in front of it for longer than she needed to. The face that looked back was hers, exactly hers, the same face she had worn in that office for 3 years. Same jaw. Same eyes. Same habit of holding herself carefully, of taking up exactly the amount of space she had been allotted and not 1 centimeter more. She thought about the woman who had handed documents to a man she didn't trust, year after year, because she had been too tired or too careful or too afraid of the alternative. She thought about the document in her drawer. The one she had printed on an impulse she had never quite understood. Something in her had known. Something small and persistent had refused to be completely erased. She straightened. She pulled her shoulders back. She walked out. Seo Jun was waiting outside the door. He held her phone. "Dune called again," he said. He paused. "From a number that does not belong to her." Nari's hand did not shake when she took the phone. But the breath she drew was careful, the kind you take when something you feared has arrived and you are deciding, in real time, whether it will destroy you or clarify you. Kwon had reached Dune. Which meant he was no longer just trying to cover a document. He was trying to cover everything. He was trying to ensure that by morning, Nario had no one left to call and nowhere left to go. Seo Jun laid the chain out on the table like a map of a place she had been living without knowing it. The cooperative fund had been established 7 years ago by a consortium of small investors who had pooled their capital through a trust arrangement. The trust had contracted with a financial management firm to handle portfolio decisions. That firm had, over time, been quietly acquired through a series of shell structures until its effective ownership rested with a holding company that Director Kwan controlled through proxies. He had not stolen from the fund immediately. That was the thing Nari kept returning to, the patience of it. He had spent 3 years building the architecture before he took anything. 2 years after that, extracting slowly, reinvesting enough to keep the returns plausible, until the final transfer. The one her signature had authorized. On paper, the cooperative's members had lost their savings to market conditions, to volatility, to the kinds of abstract forces that ordinary people are taught to accept as the cost of participation. In reality, they had been dismantled by a man who understood that the best frauds look like misfortune. The cooperative had 43 members. Nari looked at the list. Names. Ages. Contribution amounts noted in a column that her eye kept drifting back to. A man who had contributed 12 years of retirement savings. A pair of teachers. A family. The Seo name appeared twice on the same row. She looked at Seo Jun. He did not look away. He said, "My father." He said it the way people say things they have carried for a long time, not heavily, because the weight has been redistributed over years into something that no longer bends you but has changed your shape permanently. He had been 12 years old. His father's business, a small machine parts workshop, reliable and unremarkable, had survived for 20 years before the cooperative loss. It had not survived the year after. "I didn't build what I built because of him," Seo Jun said. "I built it because of the way the system responded when he tried to report it. The paperwork. The referrals. The polite explanations of why the evidence was insufficient. He sat across a desk from a man in a clean suit who told him that the market carries inherent risk, and my father thanked him and left, and never fully recovered. I decided that I would not sit across that desk." He was not asking for her sympathy. He was explaining his coordinates. There is a difference. Nari understood, with the particular clarity of someone whose own damage has given them fluency in certain kinds of pain, that what she was looking at was not a criminal who had dressed his motives in sentiment. It was a man who had decided that justice, when institutions failed to deliver it, would have to be sourced from somewhere else. The methods were not clean. The organization that occupied this building operated outside the law in ways she did not fully know, and was not being asked to endorse. But the original wound was real. And it rhymed uncomfortably with hers. She was thinking about this when the tone of the outer room changed. One of the men at the laptop said something in a low, clipped voice. Seo Jun was on his feet before Nari fully processed it. He moved to the screen and studied it for a moment without speaking. Then he said, "He has Dune at the office. He called her in under HR pretenses 40 minutes ago. He is keeping her there." The room assembled itself around a new purpose with the efficiency of people who have done this before. Phones appeared. Positions were discussed in terms Nari only partially understood. She sat in her chair and watched and felt the uselessness of the observer, the particular helplessness of having walked into someone else's competence. And then she thought about the drawer. "I have the original document," she said. The room did not go quiet dramatically. But Seo Jun turned. "I printed it the day I signed it. 3rd floor supply room, personal lockbox, back left corner. I have had the key on my keyring for 3 months." She reached into her blazer pocket. The key was there, small, unassuming, the kind of thing that had been invisible against everything else on the ring. She set it on the table. "I don't know exactly why I kept it," she said. "But I did." Seo Jun looked at the key for a moment. Then at her. "You need to go back in," he said. It was not quite a question. He was watching her to see what she would do with the information. Nari looked at the key. She thought about the 42 floors of a building she had learned to make herself invisible in. She thought about 3 years of managing a man's professional life without ever asking what it was being used for. She thought about Dune in an office at midnight, being held there by a man who had spent 18 months building a cage with her name on it. "Tell me what to do," she said. She knew the building differently at night. In the day, it was a machine of appearances, the lobby busy enough to absorb individuals, the elevators producing a steady churn of suited bodies, the 42nd floor humming with the organized noise of institutional work. At night, it became what it had always been underneath, a structure of control. The lobby guard recognized her face and waved her through without question. She had done this dozens of times, staying late to prepare documents or manage correspondence that Kwan needed by morning. The swipe of her card at the internal stairwell door was reflexive, 3 years of muscle memory in her wrist. She did not take the elevator. She took the stairs. The stairwell was a vertical tunnel of humming light, the kind of fluorescent white that flattens everything it touches. Her footsteps on the metal steps were deliberate and even. She noticed that she was not running. She had spent the last 3 years moving through this building in a kind of controlled rush. Perpetually behind, perpetually compensating for someone else's decisions. She was not doing that now. She was choosing her pace. The supply room on the 3rd floor smelled of paper and cleaning products and the particular stillness of a room no one enters unnecessarily. She crossed to the back left corner, crouched, and found the lockbox exactly where she had left it. Her hands were steady. The key turned. Inside, beneath a printed copy of a vendor agreement she barely remembered, was a single folded sheet. She unfolded it. Looked at it. Her own signature at the bottom, dated 3 months ago, on a document that matched nothing in the modified version Kwan had filed. Unaltered. Time-stamped. Real. She was standing with it in her hand when she heard the elevator doors open on the floor above. She recognized his footsteps before she heard his voice, the particular confident rhythm of a man who had never had cause to move quietly through his own building. She was already moving toward the stairwell door when he appeared at the end of the corridor, and she stopped because stopping was the only thing that looked like control. Director Kwan in the middle of the night looked almost the same as Director Kwan in the morning. The absence of his jacket was the only concession. His expression was arranged into something that would have read, to anyone who hadn't spent 3 years studying its architecture, as concern. "Nari," he said. That was all. Just her name. Spoken the way he had always spoken it, gently, with the particular weight of someone who has determined that gentleness is the most efficient instrument available. She had spent 3 years flinching at the sound of it without ever understanding why. She understood now. It was the sound of a man who had decided, at some point she had not witnessed, that she belonged to his professional landscape the way a piece of office furniture does. Useful. Replaceable. Without recourse. "Where is Dune?" she said. Not a question. A coordinate request. He didn't answer that. He began instead to talk about liability. About the complexity of her situation. About what happens to people who misrepresent their involvement in financial irregularities, a phrase she recognized as one of his, the kind that turns specific wrongdoing into abstract weather. He spoke about the report that had already been filed. He spoke about the limits of what he could do to protect her, now, given that she had chosen to involve other parties. He said her name again, somewhere in the middle of this, as though repetition might dissolve something in her. She let him finish. Then she held up the document. She did not wave it. She did not shout. She held it at chest height where he could see it clearly, in the corridor light, and she said, "This is the original. It hasn't been modified. It carries the timestamp of the version I signed, which does not authorize the transfer you filed it against." She kept her voice level. Not cold, she was not cold, she was burning. She had been burning since the elevator at 11:14 and perhaps for longer than that, but even. Controlled. A tone she had not heard from herself before. "I also know about the cooperative fund. I know about the 43 members. And the people who drove me here tonight have been building this case for 8 months. She watched his face reorganize itself. The concern collapsed first. Then the gentleness. What was underneath was not rage, it was the specific blankness of a man whose calculation has stopped producing answers. From the doorway at the end of the corridor, Dune appeared. She looked shaken but uninjured, and when her eyes found Nari her expression shifted to relief and something harder and more private that Nari would only fully understand later. She crossed the corridor and stood beside Nari without being asked. The two of them faced him. The corridor felt different with 3 people in it. Kwon reached for his phone. His last option. The room required a move. He said he was calling the Financial Crimes Unit right now. He said that whatever she thought she was holding, it would be her word, the word of the signatory, against the institutional record. He said he would ensure that by morning, her name was attached to every element of this in ways she could not recover from. The sound from behind him was not dramatic. It was simply a door opening. Seo Jun stepped into the corridor with the same unhurried geometry that had characterized every movement he had made since she got into the car. He stopped a few feet behind Kwon and did not speak. He did not need to. His presence changed the physics of the space, not through threat, exactly, but through the particular atmosphere of a man for whom this kind of corridor, this kind of midnight, this kind of confrontation carries no surprise and no fear. Kwon turned. Looked at him. The phone lowered. Something passed through Kwon's face in the silence that followed, the recognition not of a name or an organization, but of a category. The category of person who does not bluff. Who does not need to. Kwon was a man who had built his power on the assumption that the people around him had more to lose than he did. He was looking at someone for whom that mathematics did not apply. His hand dropped to his side. The Financial Crimes Unit received the full document chain at 4:17 in the morning. It arrived as an anonymous submission, professionally structured, legally precise, formatted in the manner of someone who understood the specific requirements of admissible evidence. It included the unmodified proxy authorization, the modified version Kwon had filed, a comparative timestamp analysis, and a trail connecting the shell account to the holding company Kwon controlled. It included 43 names. It included the date of the final transfer. Nari did not ask Seo Jun if he had sent it. She already knew. And she knew that somewhere in the structure of what had been submitted, there were things she could not fully account for, evidence gathered through methods that would not survive scrutiny in a formal investigation, shaped and presented to direct attention toward what could be proven through channels that would. She sat with the complexity of this for a while and found that she could. It did not resolve cleanly. But it was real. Director Kwon was not arrested at dawn with any drama. He was detained quietly, mid-morning, by 2 people in plain clothes who met him at the entrance to the building as he arrived for what he had apparently, right up until the moment he saw them, believed would be an ordinary day. His lawyer was contacted. A statement was taken. The process of institutional accountability began its slow, unglamorous work. Nari was not there. She had not wanted to be. She had already said everything she needed to say. Dune took a cab home at 5 in the morning. She and Nari stood outside the building for a few minutes first, in the great pre-dawn quiet, the rain having finally stopped. They did not say much. They didn't need to. 3 years of different proximity to the same damage had left them with a vocabulary that did not require complete sentences. Dune squeezed her hand and looked at her for a long moment, and then she was gone. Later, a little after 6, the sky beginning its reluctant move toward light, Nari sat in the back of the black car again. It felt different from the first time. She had noticed, in the hours since she'd gotten in, how much of that first ride had been governed by the body's emergency systems, the adrenaline and the calculation and the animal need to assess what kind of danger she had moved from and what kind she had moved into. None of that was running now. She was tired in the deep, clean way that follows something that required everything, and she was sitting in the back of this car by choice. Seo Jun drove. The city was waking in increments, delivery vehicles, early shift workers, the particular demographic of people who belong to the hours between night and day. "What will you do?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. Her career at Kwon Capital was, obviously, gone. Her professional references were entangled with an organization that was now under investigation. Her name would appear in the proceedings, unavoidably, as the signatory, and even exoneration has its residue, the way a word that is retracted still leaves a shape in the air where it was spoken. "I don't know," she said. "But that's the first time that answer hasn't felt like a threat." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Why did you keep the document?" She considered this. The honest answer was that she didn't fully know. That she had printed it on a reflex she did not examine, filed it on an impulse she could not explain, and carried the key for 3 months without understanding what it was the key to. "I think some part of me never believed the story I was being told about myself," she said. "He spent 3 years telling me I was competent and invisible in the same breath. That I was good at my job and that my job was not to have opinions about what the job was for." She looked out the window. "I kept one thing he didn't know about. I think that was me refusing, just barely, to be completely rewritten." Seo Jun was quiet again. Then, "Why did you get into the car?" She turned to look at him. He said, "Most people hesitate. You didn't." She thought about 11:14 p.m. The locked door. The rain. The hazard lights blinking in the dark like a pulse. She had not thought. She had moved. Some part of her had decided, in that precise moment, that the risk of staying still was greater than the risk of the unknown. "I think I had already decided to change something," she said. "I just hadn't found the door yet." Seo Jun glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Something in his expression, not quite a smile, but the structural possibility of one, shifted. "Those," he said, "are the only people worth helping." The document was still in her blazer pocket. Slightly damp at the edges from the night's rain, the fold line deepened from the hours of carrying it, but intact. 3 months she had kept it without understanding why. In the end, it had not saved her. She had saved herself, by printing it, by walking back in, by saying aloud, in a fluorescent-lit corridor at midnight, the things she had been not saying for 3 years. The document was just the evidence. The decision had been made long before she understood she was making it. She kept a document she hoped she would never need. Most of us have something like it, a small, quiet act of self-preservation we performed before we understood what it was protecting. A decision we made in the dark, on instinct, that we did not think to call courage until later. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories about the moment ordinary people stop waiting to be rescued and start becoming the thing they needed, follow along. There are more coming.